Zacc, we got you back, and I have a little bit of a controversial topic, and so we're going to ask you some questions around this that hopefully you can help us with.
For sure.
When we interact with financial advisors, the reality of the world is everybody's trying to sell something. And so if somebody is going into a financial advisor relationship, I think that what we can accomplish here is to help them know which questions to ask. And I saw something at a conference that I went to. They said that the average person meets with one financial advisor before making that relationship. So it's not like they're going out and interacting with a lot of financial advisors, which tells me that they're just immediately making that decision. So I want to arm them with questions, and I think that you can do a good job of this, of what questions should I ask a financial advisor to interrogate them effectively to know if they're going to be helpful to me.
Right. I didn't know that stat about meeting with one. Are you saying they meet with one and they end up with that one,
Yep.
or meet with one and end up?
No, they meet with
like
the first advisor. Or they go with the first advisor they meet with. So there are people, obviously, there are exceptions to this, but I think it was like 60% of everyone who works with a financial advisor goes with the first one they met. It's usually coming as a referral of their neighbor, their friend, or whatever, and they don't ask multiple financial advisors.
It doesn't surprise me at all because it's very labor intensive to try to go through the process of understanding the actual skill set and relationship with a financial advisor. It'd be tough to do it with 2 or 3 or 4 at once. And some people, I know some people that will, and it's like they turn it into their full-time job for a month or 2, and that's all they're really focused on. That's what they do in the evenings, and they stress about it, and it can be tough. It can be a pretty emotional experience, too, for some of them.
Yeah, and I get this a lot, obviously, through the YouTube comments, a little bit more on the Medicare side of kind of interrogating me. And certain ways that questions are asked kind of throw up red flags for myself and a little bit defensive. And so I think that in any human interaction with a relationship, we want this to be beneficial for everybody. So how can we treat each other like humans, knowing that they're coming from a little bit of a guarded position, maybe not knowing all of the things to talk about and the phrases and everything else going on?
Right. Okay, so let's be pragmatic about this. It's a relationship. You're about to begin what is hopefully a 10 to 20-year relationship. And it's a bit of a dance because if you actually do happen to be sitting across from a really great financial advisor, that advisor has options, just like you have options, right? And the advisor isn't interested in filling their time because there's a limited capacity for each individual advisor. So if you find a good one, they are not wanting to fill their book of business, their book of clients, with folks that are going to be really, really difficult all the time. And I'm just trying to be pragmatic about it, right? Because I think a lot of times you'll see those articles online that are like, here are 20 questions to ask your financial advisor. I'll tell you what happens when you come in with 20 questions and you ask, are you a fiduciary? How do you handle conflicts of interest? And you go through this checklist of very pointed questions. But when you say, are you a fiduciary? The advisor hears, are you honest? And then the advisor thinks, oh my gosh, this client's going to be hard. That's what's going on between what you said, what they heard, and what they think. Now, I'm not saying the advisor shouldn't be a fiduciary. I'm not saying the advisor shouldn't give you those answers. And I'm not saying you don't deserve those answers. You deserve to know. You deserve to know that your advisor is going to take care of you, that your advisor has your best interests at heart, and that your advisor is smart enough to handle your complexity. Like, those are things you deserve. But I don't think a list of questions like that is the approach. And because it's a bit of a dance, I mean, we do have some help here we're going to go over it today, but it's a bit of a dance, and you really need to be careful not to misstep, like on the very first note of the song, right? How do you want to begin with like the way to approach this? Because the consumer deserves to know. Frankly, I think it should be easier for the consumer to be able to assess many financial advisors and be able to have their pick. I wish that people weren't meeting with just one and going.
Yeah.
I think that more people, well, selfishly, I think more people would find Capita if they had access to research 20 to 50 advisors and get a taste for each one. I think we would shine. But so I think people deserve that. And then on the other side, I think they need to know what it's like for good financial advisors and what they're looking for as well from a client standpoint. How do you want to begin with this, Erik?
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple of things where the barrier to this getting more information around it is just the time and the effort, as you mentioned, and knowing who's available to them. You brought up fiduciary. Let's knock off a couple of like the hot ones, but fiduciary. are you a fiduciary comes up in a lot of the posts that I see just on videos and everything else. If the first thing you need to ask a financial advisor is, are they a fiduciary? What's your kind of idea around that question in general?
I believe it is a misguided heuristic. So a heuristic is a rule of thumb that people use to make a mental shortcut with, I can do this and know that decision this way or that way really easily. Like, if something is expensive, it must be really good. That's not a proper heuristic, right? There are plenty of things that are of high quality that aren't the most expensive item out there. But it's really easy to say, oh, well, I spent this much for it, so it's worth it. Okay, so going back to advisors and the fiduciary question, I guess my first question is, do you know as a consumer what you're going to do with that answer? And at least what I've seen so far is the consumer wants to hear yes. And as soon as they hear yes, it's like they open the drawbridge to their financial wealth. Like, come on in. Man, I'm so glad that you're a fiduciary. It's like, well, hold on. There's some pretty awful fiduciaries out there. And so the word fiduciary and the actual delivering of a fiduciary responsibility, those are different. So an advisor can call themselves a fiduciary if they operate under the investment advisor licensing because legally they're required to. So because they're required to, and it's in the language, you have to put the client's best interest at heart. They can say, I'm a fiduciary. See, I'm legally obligated to do so. Well, being legally obligated to be a fiduciary is different than being good at being a fiduciary.
Yeah.
Those two things are very different. And you can make it look like you're doing everything in the best interests of the client. But let me give you an example. Let's say that there's 3 investment options that an advisor has, and they pick the very best one for the client out of the 3. Well, hold on, wait a second. What if there's 20 over here that the advisor is unwilling to spend extra time to go find and research and go through the pain of onboarding to their platform? Well, they could say, I'm a fiduciary. I picked the best of the 3. But you didn't pick the best out of all 23. There were 20 more you didn't even consider. So like there's different levels of care that can be given. So I guess let's summarize. If you're going to ask that fiduciary question, which I actually recommend you don't, because I've met really great people who are not legally fiduciaries, and I've met some pretty like wolves in sheep clothing on the fiduciary side. So I wouldn't even ask the question. What you're trying to find out really is this person going to take care of me? Or are they going to take care of themselves? That's what you want to know. Let's find that out in a different way.
I think it's interesting you say that because the advisors in your firm are fiduciaries, right? Like it's not that you're coming at this saying, oh, we're not, so don't ask this question.
Right. We actually are.
Yeah, you are. But there's more important things to flesh out here.
And the advisors that like promote that really heavy in their marketing, like we're fiduciaries, everybody else is terrible. I find that they're like the most angry advisors out there. There's like this, I don't know how to best describe it. It just seems like they're very combative.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I'd rather just focus on, like I get really nerdy, right? I'd rather focus on tax strategy and investment and Social Security and all these other things than how this fiduciary fight.
Okay. So what are the core competencies then that somebody should be looking for? What are the questions that we can ask me to you that would make it so that we're both kind of in this relationship together, working together in this dance?
Yeah. Okay. So instead of having a list of questions, I think you should have, we built a framework for people to think through this. And if you're familiar with the 4 C's of diamonds, which I don't know if I could list them off, quality and carat and color and cut, something. I don't know. That might be
Sounds
it.
great.
It's a long time since I bought my wife a diamond, apparently. So, okay, so then going into the same idea, there's 4 C's of advisor quality. And I think we should just go through those. And your goal is to assess each of these 4, not have a list of questions.
Perfect.
So you're looking for competence, communication, care, compensation. Competence, communication, care, compensation. So and let's do it really fast.
Okay.
So because you like to have short little clips. So so competence is, can they keep up with the complexity of my situation? Communication. Do I understand what they're saying? Or are they talking over my head? Or are they talking in an abrasive way? You know, there's a lot of different versions of communication style, right? Mm-hmm. Care, this is the fiduciary question. It's just a little bit different. Like, are they giving me proper care? And are they looking out for me before they're doing other things? Are they giving me enough time? Are they giving me the thing that's best for me? Anyway, care. And then compensation. No matter what, if you have those first three, but the compensation is incentivizing the advisor to do something in particular that you don't love, even really good people are somewhat influenced. I would say fairly, well, let's put it this way. A lot of people are really influenced by compensation, and really great, wonderful people, I would say, are even somewhat influenced by compensation, right?
Yeah.
So that last one matters. Okay, so in terms of, if we're going to go with competence, so you're wanting to find, have they dealt with my situation before? So that's literally what I would ask. Like, okay, you've gotten to know me, and by the way, I wouldn't ask these questions right out of the gate, right? I would get to know them a little bit, let them get to know you and your financial situation. So as soon as they figured out more about you, you can say something like, you've gotten to know me quite a bit. You know my financial situation pretty well. Think of somebody that is in a very similar situation to me. What were some of the best moves you guys were able to do together? So that's different. I'm actually giving the advisor an opportunity to shine, to like talk about the things that they know. Now, if they can't come back to me with pretty concrete, like, we did this, we recommended this, they did backdoor Roth conversions, they did, that you can go through and get, they should have a list of 3 or 4 or 5, 6, maybe 10 different things that they could rattle off pretty quickly. If they don't, then they probably are very focused on one thing. Maybe it's just investing your portfolio. And then you'll know that you're not going to get all the other services or advice or knowledge you need. Like if you're exiting a business and you ask the question, hey, when was the last time you guys went through this process with another client, and what did you find helpful before the business owner sold? And things should come up like, well, okay, so you really should be reviewing whether or not you want to stay as that particular entity type, whether it's LLC, S Corp, C Corp, and some of those changes actually need to be made 5+ years before you actually sell. We might be too late on that, but for other customers, we've gotten them with attorneys and worked through some of that. Generally, before you sell, you really should clean up your P&L. You really need to be careful about how you're expending in the business, and also how do you pay yourself? Because when you leave, that's actually an expense of bringing in talent that will affect your valuation. You can see how there's advice there that they could be giving, that if they have no answers, they've missed the check mark for competence.
It's interesting as you're talking about this, my best friend in the whole world growing up is now an orthopedic surgeon, right? So from a doctor's perspective. And it's like, okay, if I go to a doctor and I ask, are you a doctor? That's kind of like, are you a fiduciary, right? But I've asked him questions all the time of like, hey, this hurts, this feels this way, whatever. And he's like, and he specializes in the knees and the hip. So I'm like, hey, my dad's back hurts. He's like, I do knees and hips. Like he's just so focused on that one topic that you don't really go to him for the wide range of things. But if you go to a general practitioner, a family practitioner, they have a different competency of looking at an overall thing. And then you have the specialist. So as you're just going through this, right? If you're talking to somebody, are you a doctor? Are you a fiduciary? That's one question. But then it's like, okay, have you had something or dealt with somebody with my same ailment? In this case, it's a financial thing. I think that's a huge thing to flesh out. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
You're going to find out competency pretty quick when you start asking some of those questions. In all fairness, though, let's be fair to the consumer a little bit here. They go to a knees and hip doctor, and you ask about some pain you have in your jaw. And it's almost like the doctor's like, I know everything about jaws. You know what I mean? So that's the problem with our industry is that they're like the doctors are pretty straightforward with it. Yeah. They're like, yeah, I know nothing about what's going on up there. But the financial advisors think they know everything about everything.
Perfect.
So it's not helpful. That's why I think it's more. You need to do more than asking like, do you know about this other, like, do you know how to help my shoulder? No, it's like, you need to be more specific. The last time you guys went through this process, what was the recovery like? What was the, you can ask very specific questions.
We had an episode where you talked through the different types of financial professionals and kind of what they sound like. So if you're interacting, you're asking these questions with a financial professional, what are ways that you can kind of see, okay, they might not be as competent, right? If they can, what are ways that they're going to skirt that question if they don't feel adequate, I guess?
It's a good question, Eric. The hard part is you have to be a good interviewer, and that's a whole skill set, right? Let's say this. Be confident if you don't understand what they're saying. That is probably the biggest issue we run into, where a consumer doesn't understand the advisor, feels dumb, and then they're like, I don't want to dig deeper because it'll expose I don't know. Mm-hmm. You're not supposed to know. You're the consumer.
Yeah.
Like that's not your job. And if the advisor can't communicate what they know in a way that you can understand, so we're diving into communication here. So that let's actually hit communication, because I think this answers a little bit of what you're talking about. If an advisor cannot communicate clearly with you in a way that you can follow and you can understand, if the advisor can't adapt to your financial expertise wherever you're at on that scale, that could be the problem. That your misunderstanding of their competence might be that they're just not very good at communicating it. So between their communication method, style, and ability, and your understanding of what they're actually talking about, I think you're going to have to just measure both of those at the same time. But the reason I don't have a great answer for that, Eric, is it's hard. It's hard, and I would just say it's just like interviewing. I interview to hire people all the time, and I'm amazed at how you can't know everything about somebody when you hire them.
Well, I think, too, as you hire more people, you start to see certain ways or figure out ways to ask other questions, too. So as we've talked about, are you just meeting with one financial advisor and going, or are you meeting with a couple? That might help them develop a little bit more of an understanding of what to ask. And, okay, I asked this question. They answered this way. I didn't really know what was going on, but I'm going to go Google it, or I'm going to find out what they were saying. And then in the next round, you can kind of ask a little bit more pointed questions.
Yeah, so I agree. It's tough, but you have to do your best.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to do your best to figure out, does this person understand my situation enough? Have they seen it before, at least a couple times? And if so, what have they done in the past?
So have we hit everything on communication? Is that the second
Well, no,
C?
we hit competence. Communication is, we could probably get there pretty quick, but it's just, are they speaking over your head? And the ways that I would assess that are like tone and patience. Do they seem like they're trying to put on a show for you or present? Like, are they trying to talk at you? Are they trying to, and I feel bad because I've been in other roles at other firms where I was told, like, I had this model, this fact-finding model with a staircase of, like, facts and issues and needs and drivers. And I was taught to, like, you need to go through this and then ask them these questions to get to this and then expose this issue and then you can solve it. And it's just like, oh my gosh, that's just way too complex for what should be a very open communication between two humans about what that person needs and what I know that I can help get there, Anyway, so you just have to simplify it. I guess what I'm saying is I think most people can tell when they're being, like, pushed into certain paths for like a sale.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. I think people know when the other party is using too much jargon. Usually the other party doesn't know. So you got a choice there. If they're throwing acronyms at you and words you don't know, if you want to, like, be super confident and be like, I don't know what you mean by RMD. I don't know what you mean by QCD. I don't know. You can just throw it out there, and then the advisor, if they don't adapt quickly, like, okay, this particular prospect isn't reading about finance on their own, which is fine. It's not their job. But now I need to know I need to use qualified charitable distribution and required minimum distribution and not RMD. If the advisor keeps using jargon and acronyms, they're not thinking about you.
Yeah. Well, and this is coming from my experience, right? Because I get to interview you all the time, and there are topics that I'm not the expert on. And so that's something that I hope that I'm able to continue to develop is if you say something and I don't know what it means, I can stop you and say like, hold on, Zacc. And we've done that over the 15 interviews or however many we've done, right? So I think that that's something that there is an initial fear for me of looking stupid in the sense of I don't know.
Especially because you're on YouTube while you're doing it.
And everybody knows how bright or not I am. No, so there's that fear for sure. And I've shared it before where I went to a sprinkler store because I had broken sprinklers. And the guy treated me like I was an idiot. And I am in the sprinkler world. I don't know what's going on with sprinklers. And so I think that's a fear that people have of if I ask this question, the person I'm sitting across from is going to think that I'm a lesser human being or whatever. When in reality, asking those questions really helps both of you get on the same page, both of you communicate in a better way. So
yeah,
definitely
and as soon as you say like, I don't understand that, what you just said, an advisor should be able to say, okay, that's the level of financial exposure this person has had so far. So I gotta make sure I communicate at that level. Whereas some consumers will come in with crazy high financial exposure, and for those people, they feel talked down to if you never use jargon, if you always use the full names, and they want things to move faster. So a good advisor can adapt to the financial exposure of the client. And then the other one on this communication is, are they listening to you as much as they're listening to themselves? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
With communication, would communication cover, once they are a client, how often they're interacting with them? Are they setting up meetings once a year, or do you have a more open line of communication throughout the year? Would that fall into this category?
I think of that a little bit more like care, which is our next concept,
perfect.
Because care is about how much effort and like how much they're putting you in their thoughts and taking care of you, right? So your cadence and your interaction, all of that is going to be a little bit more about how much are they looking out for you. In this communication category, I'm very specifically talking about the way that you communicate. It could be the way you email back and forth. If your advisor is set up for text messaging, the way you text back and forth, that's difficult, by the way, compliance-wise. But we do it. We figured it out. But then most importantly is when you're actually talking.
Okay.
How's that communication going?
Does that mean we're ready for care?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the
care.
fiduciary question. Okay. But you're trying to figure out how if they're giving me proper care, and instead of asking, are you a fiduciary? And I think I would look at this as, okay, I want to know, am I being sold something today and ignored in the future? That's one of my care concerns, right? Mm-hmm. So the question I would ask there is, hey, for somebody in my situation, what are the biggest planning opportunities you guys run across year 3 to year 10 of a client-advisor relationship? So there's a really specific reason for that. A lot of financial advisors think that you put somebody in a portfolio, you put them on a certain withdrawal plan or investment plan, and then it's autopilot. And the reality is that's just not the case. Every year there should be tax considerations being discussed. And every couple to every 3 or 4 years, there should be estate planning touch base. What do you say? There should be estate planning check-ins around who's in charge of your assets, at what time, under disability, at death, what about your kids? I mean, there are things that change in a family dynamic. So there are planning steps that should be revisited throughout the years. If the advisor can't come to you with much between year 3 and 10, or if they say, oh, by then I hope we're just on autopilot, what I hear there is, I hope at that point I can take a fee without talking to you.
Yeah.
That's not okay.
Well, I see this with like my mom. She passed away, but she had set up like a will and a trust 20 years ago, and then her financial picture changed. She got divorced. She had kids. Sorry, my dad's kids got divorced who were in the will. So there are all these changes around a divorce specifically. There are job changes. She gets cancer and wants to check off bucket list items. So there are all these financial things happening as well, to where if it's like, hey, I just set you on autopilot and I haven't talked to you in 5 years, there's a lot that changed in 20 to where to be able to be nimble enough and communicate those changes, I think is preferable for me. And it sounds like that's what you feel like an advisor should be doing, is being active in that person's life, assuming they want that. Maybe there are people that are just like, I don't want to talk to you. Just set me up once.
I don't think so. There are people that want that, and they're looking for a flat fee. They want their their financial plan to be kind of launched, and then they want to maintain their financial plan moving forward, that's fine. In that case, you should be looking for an advisor that charges a project-based fee and then disappears. But yeah, anybody you want an ongoing relationship with, then you want them to be aware that there's more work to be done after year 3. That's it.
Is there anything else they can do to flesh out care?
Yeah. So that's like one of 3 potential.
Because no advisor is going to come out and say, I don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Which is why the fiduciary question isn't helpful.
Yeah.
Because they say, yes, they are. And again, you can't ask that question like you said, like, hey, do you care? But you can ask that question about specifically what types of things you do in year 3 to 10. Another question, and this is getting a lot more dicey in terms of like how the advisor might respond to this. But at this point, if you're being this patient and kind, you have the right to like dive in. So you could ask a question specifically on, let's say you have an investment over here that you know the advisor can't take on. They can't, it's a private investment, it's something else. I think you should throw that investment to the advisor and ask them what they think.
Would an example be like real estate?
Yeah, real estate. That's a piece of like a rental property. That's a really good one because that one's pretty common. And if the advisor is quick to tell you that you need to sell it and put it in their portfolio, you know something's going on there, right? But if the advisor is slow to tell you to sell it and put it in a diversified portfolio, that's different. So let me explain what I mean by that. You are not looking with that private investment, the real estate, something else. You're not looking for, well, if they told me not to do it, they're a bad advisor. That's not what you're looking for. You're looking to assess their approach to something that doesn't benefit themselves. Did they at least give you like a thoughtful consideration around what it is? Did they ask enough questions on that real estate property to know what's the cash flow? What's the interest rate? How much have you depreciated it? If you sold it, what would be the tax exposure and liability? Like there are a bunch of questions you should ask as an advisor to understand that particular investment opportunity before coming to any conclusion one way or the other.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to assess their approach. If they tell you keep it or don't keep it, that doesn't really matter. You're just looking for what did they do before they got to that recommendation.
So about a year ago, coming up on a year, I was in a position to take a risk on myself and branch off and do what we are doing right now.
Yeah.
And so in talking with that, whether that's should I contribute more to my IRAs or should I contribute more to an emergency fund or should I take this risk? It was just a pleasant experience to sit down and you went through, okay, what are the pros? What are the cons? What is the worst case scenario? What is the best case scenario? Reality is probably going to be somewhere in the middle. And then the encouragement there wasn't take any money you have, any inheritance you get and dump it into investments with us. It was, hey, I believe in you. I think this is going to be a great opportunity for you in the future. Go take a risk on yourself. And so that was an opportunity, I think, for an advisor to suggest something that could benefit you and your firm and everything else. But the suggestion was the opposite of go take a risk on yourself.
Yeah, I remember those conversations. And so that's like less around like the advice side and more around the like, yeah, it was your business might not have worked. Obviously it is working great and you get a lot of attention and you're doing really well on YouTube, which is wonderful. But that is a good example of if the advisor is so afraid of letting you bet on yourself in that scenario and unwilling to consider that and just wants the money to hit their own investment portfolio, that could be a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else on care that we need to?
The last one is more pointed that you could ask. I mean, a dentist has conflicts of interest. Your school teachers have conflicts of interest. Every profession has conflicts of interest. So if you want to, you could get very pointed with the last question and say, hey, what is the most common conflict of interest that you deal with, and how do you manage it? That is a little bit different than are you a fiduciary, because it forces them into actually giving you an answer of a conflict of interest. Because some people who say, we're fiduciaries, we don't have conflicts of interest. I'm like, hold on. Like, everyone has conflicts of interest. Whether you get the client or don't. We just talked about it, the real estate property. Whether like that's a conflict of interest. Even if you're a flat fee and not managing the asset, you have a conflict of interest. If you charge hourly, your conflict is to work as long as possible and keep getting paid. If you charge a flat fee, your conflict is to work as little as possible and collect the flat fee. Like there's always a conflict in there. So can they even identify that they have one? If no, that's a problem. If they're like, oh, we don't have conflicts of interest, it's like, well, then you're blind to that. Yeah. And can they identify it? And if they can they articulate how they deal with it? Like I can tell you right now that we are very careful on investment selection so that our investment advisors don't make more money by putting you in one fund versus another fund, so that the advisors don't care. Now, I hire people that I hope, even if they were compensated differently, that they would do the right thing. Like that's a big passion, right? But on top of that, the way that I'm going to manage it on top of that is to avoid them making more money on any of them, just to eliminate that as much as possible. So a lot of conflicts of interest you can eliminate, and others you have to manage. And when you have to manage them, you have to disclose them. That's part of our industry too, is like disclose what conflicts you're experiencing, and then how do you manage them? And our regulators are asking those questions of us if they ever audit or want to find out. A consumer should be able to get an answer like that as well.
And I think there are different personality types out there, but I've always thought this with the channel on the Medicare side of things is like, it's better if I tell them everything and they learn it from me than it is for me to not tell them. They learn it from somebody else and they say, why didn't you tell me, right? Yeah. So there are conflicts in Medicare as well. So I'm like, hey, I have videos where I say, here's how we're compensated. Here's where it comes into play, and here's where that could be a conflict. So I personally am passionate about that. We're in a transparency age, right? Like information gets leaked all of the time. You aren't going to be able to hide stuff. So come out and talk about it. And I think that people appreciate that. At least that's been my experience.
Yep. And those conflicts typically are around compensation, which is the last one, right? How do they get paid?
Yeah.
So you want to dive into that one now?
Yeah, let's do it.
So we've covered this.
Tell us how much money you're making.
Exactly. Could you put an infographic on there? So we've covered this on your other episode with me around financial professionals, and probably that's where you should go if you're really wanting to understand, insurance agents doing life or annuity, full service brokers, discount brokers, or advisors who do assets under management or flat fee or a hybrid. So you can see how in each of those three categories of financial advisors or financial professionals, they can be broken out into different categories. You need to figure out who you're talking to out of those people. And I think we'll put these resources up, but you have a grid, I have a grid, and we have the little chart with the 4 C's now, and I've got this article people can read through. It has examples of questions and how to navigate this conversation. You just need to ask, not on the very first moment you're talking to them, what is your fee structure, and can you walk me through how you get paid? Like that's a fair question. You should know that before you sign up with somebody, and it should be very clear. I probably wouldn't ask that in the very first moment. It's kind of like an employee in their very first interview wanting to negotiate salary. It's like, I don't even know who you are, you know?
Yeah.
So that can be a problem.
Can it still be on the first interview just later as you've kind of fleshed out all of this stuff? Or are you saying in the subsequent interviews?
It's fourth in the list for a reason.
Yeah.
Like you don't even need to talk about compensation if they're not communicating well.
Yeah.
If they're not good enough at their job from a competence standpoint, and if they don't care about you, like why in the world would we be talking about fees?
Yeah.
You already know they missed. You're done. Move on.
Yeah.
And so I would say I would go through the first three around competency, communication, care. If they check the boxes and they do well there, yeah, let's move on to compensation. And then the two things I want to know is, how do you get paid? And then what do I pay that doesn't go to you? That second one is tricky. Yeah. So let's talk about mutual funds. Oftentimes we'll run into portfolios where the advisor says, I charge 1% or I charge 1.25%. And then they put them in mutual funds that charge another 1.5%. And the advisor doesn't feel obligated necessarily in that case. Some advisors don't feel obligated to tell the client, about the expense ratio, the one that's under the hood that you don't see. They are like, well, I only charge 1, but the client's paying 2.5. So that's a problem. And that isn't just, it's not fair to the consumer to say your fee is 1% when their fee is 2.5.
Yeah.
It's like there are options out there that are way cheaper than 1.5 expense ratios on mutual funds. Why aren't you using them? You know?
Yeah.
And if you really, really believe that this one fund is worth a 1.5% expense ratio, which primarily I don't. I think that's way, way too much for the investment cost. But if you believe that that fund, maybe it does something crazy special and very unique, then I think you should tell the client that. Like, hey, there are cheaper options out there for investments in general. Nobody else does this merger arbitrage acquisition type strategy. That I can't find anybody else that does this particular thing for less than 1.5 and does it well. That's why I think it's still worth it. But that's fine if you have that open conversation. What's not fine is I charge 1% and then it's really 2.5.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's a problem. That's the underlying cost and the all-in costs that they might not be aware of. I also didn't like, it's less and less common nowadays with loaded mutual funds kind of going away. Loaded mutual funds, the words just sound terrible, right? I'm kind of glad that they're going away. But it used to be that you would buy a fund and you would pay 4.5%, 5% right off the top immediately as a Class A front-end loaded mutual fund. A for the front, B for the back, C, it is a larger expense, continuous. Those are not legit finance words, A front, B back, and C continuous. That's how I remember it.
Okay.
Okay, so like a C would have like a 2% expense ratio. A B might be 2 or 3 or 4% on the back end that the advisor makes, and an A might be up to 5% or 5.75, I remember seeing on the front end. And those advisors sometimes would say like, oh, client, you don't have to pay me. The mutual funds pay me. You don't have to pay me at all. And it's like, well, okay, but if they take 5% from my portfolio and put it in their bank account and then they put it in your bank account, it kind of feels like I'm paying you 5%.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's another example of like a misleading way of explaining compensation.
Yeah. Well, and again, like all of this, I think to your point is the communication, the care, the competence, and then the compensation is all coming together of we're human beings, we're talking to each other. Hopefully I can go into that conversation knowing that you're going to give me direct answers. And then hopefully I think this whole thing is as the financial advisor, hopefully these people that come and ask you or any other financial advisor questions can come into that with a little bit more knowledge too of how to navigate this situation. I have a question that I deal with on my end because my face is here on YouTube and now your face is here on YouTube. But if somebody's listening to this and they're like, oh, I actually really agree with Zacc and I like what Zacc's saying and he sounds just like Ryan Reynolds and he's super handsome and he's really attractive. When people reach out to me, I'm not licensed everywhere and they're probably going to be working with one of my partners. And I'm very sensitive to who I let be my partners, right? And so that's something where I don't have somebody in every single state. I've got a very select group of people that I have met with. I know their families. I know how they treat people. And so as people reach out to me wanting Erik, they don't really get Erik. So how does that happen with you? If they reach out and like, I really like what Zacc said, but in reality, as the president of Capita, you're focused more on other things. So how can they be confident that they're working with that? Or not just Zacc, but they've met with the president of a different financial firm.
Right, because they're going to try to put the communicators out in public and keep them talking to the public. Okay, my role as president of Capita Financial Network, if we do things right, if we do things the way we should, right now we have one large headquarters office. We're hoping to open up another one shortly. We should have offices over the next 10 years. We should have offices in many states. We should have, instead of 2,600 households, we should have 10,000 households. My primary mission is superior financial planning to as many households as possible. So what that means is I need to train an army of extremely qualified, well-communicating, honest, and good financial advisors. That is the way that we will get superior financial planning to as many households as possible. The second way that we'll do it is conversations like this, because there are a lot of people out there that may never hire a financial advisor. and they're still going to have superior financial planning through the things that you put out on your channel, right? So I'm a big fan of value add education, throw it out there, and good things happen. So if somebody comes to Capita and is like, hey, I want to talk to a financial advisor, and they've listened to me talk, and maybe we speak and think similar to each other, right? I'm really hoping that this is a big deal for Capita as well. We are what's called an ensemble practice. Inside the registered investment advisor firms, you have like platforms that any advisor can just hook up to and run their business however they want, do their meetings however they want, offer investments almost however they want. Like that is not us. We are more, the word would be like homogenous, like more consistent. We want it to be so similar between clients of different advisors at Capita that if one's on vacation or something, it's very easy for another advisor to pick up and have it feel seamless. It also creates efficiencies in the client experience because we have 60 employees and 18 advisors. The other employees can jump in and know exactly what's going on without it being like, oh, this advisor does it this way, this advisor does it that way. And so we're passionate about streamlining all of the processes and making it more efficient for a client as well. So I guess my advice for somebody, if they're talking to any firm, is just use this framework. Use the 4 C's. Anybody. If you've listened to one person present and you're talking to somebody else at that firm, go through this process, figure out whether or not they're competent, communicating well, they care about you, and how they're compensated. And if you can figure out those 4 things, you'll be good. And same goes for my firm. If you're talking to somebody at my firm and you feel like those 4 are, we've checked all those boxes, wonderful. And if we haven't, then I'd actually love to know about that. Like, I'd love to know why we didn't check all the boxes.
Yeah.
And then maybe that's something I can go back to my team and figure out how to make that better. I know that we're not going to be the advisor for every single prospective planning individual out there. But we do have specialties that we think hit a certain market and we think we can do well for them.
That's awesome. Is there anything that we missed in this? I know we'll have this link for them to download this article and this framework for them.
This is kind of a weird observation, just rubbing shoulders with financial advisors. Some of the best financial advisors are not funny, they're not charismatic, not good looking, and they're not very interesting at times. Some of the highest paid financial advisors are oftentimes funny, charismatic, good looking, and very interesting at times. So the point I'm trying to make here is I wish that it was easier for consumers because we are attracted to folks that stand out. Oftentimes, I guess what I'm saying is give the nerds a chance, right? Like be conscientious about what you are looking for.
And we're not talking about the retirement nerds as a
kind
platform.
of am, but no, I'm just
totally
joking.
But like just nerds in general.
Yeah, give the nerd a chance. Like if that person loves spreadsheets and you're like, I would not hang out with you on a weekend. Mm-hmm. They might be the best financial advisor you could ever have. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's something that I've found has been tough in the industry, that I've known a lot of really great financial advisors that just don't know how to attract clients because they're just so good at what they do and they can't see the rest.
Sounds like you're saying be careful of heuristics, right? Of like just because they're good looking and they're driving a really nice car doesn't mean they're a great financial advisor. And just because they aren't dressed particularly well or they don't have a certain look about them, it doesn't mean that they're a bad advisor.
Yeah. Like I lived in a really small house, not really small. I lived in a regular, like smaller home. We were for quite a long time, like a decade. And then finally decided to buy a bigger place across town, a little bit nicer neighborhood. And we love it. And we love it. It's in a space where I used to ride my mountain bike and hike up on the hill, and I used to love the views from that exact spot. So when those lots went for sale, we bought one, and now I get to see it while I'm making a morning drink. I get to see the same. So there's some nostalgia there for me as well, right? I have been shocked at how many people come to me now thinking I know more about money now than I did back then. And the only thing that's different is my mortgage is bigger. Like that's not, one might argue that was a worse financial decision.
Yeah.
And somehow people think that I'm now smarter with money because of it.
So interesting. We have a tradition of having a secret keyword at the end of the video to make sure that people have made it this far. And I do it on 300 of my other videos, so I leave that responsibility to you anytime you come in here. So do you have a secret keyword?
You know, you have this tradition, and then I have a tradition of forgetting that you have this tradition. And then I
As
end
long
up
as we're
having
consistent.
to come up with something on the fly. I also don't want to get it too heated in your comments. I was going to say something like, I actually am really interested to know like the craziest financial advice people have been given. Would you think that would be okay? Is that going to open the floodgates?
Yeah.
I want to know like the craziest thing a financial advisor has told you to do. Or maybe not a financial advisor. It could be your neighbor. That's usually where you get the craziest financial advice.
Yeah.
The craziest financial counsel anybody has ever given you. Throw it in there. And believe it or not, like when I get bored and it's in the evening, I pull up my phone, I look through these comments. I actually really love, and I don't mind when people make fun of me too. Like I kind of get a kick out of a lot of it.
Well, I take screenshots of all of the admirers you have and send them to you. So.
Yeah, this is the first time I've worn glasses because someone a long time ago was like, man, what prescription is he wearing? Those things are thick. Apparently, I'm finally recovered from it.
The comments cut deep. I'm telling you, they can cut deep.
Anyway.
You're awesome. I appreciate you taking this time to do this for us again. And anybody who made it this far, download the free guide that we have, the framework that you've put out there. And hope to have you back here soon.
Thanks, Erik.
Thanks, Zacc.